All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave. Just here for another Wavecast. We haven't finished any books, don't have the gang all together, so we're just doing a stream of consciousness. And my question to either one of you, whoever wants to pick up, what do you think the aftermath of this American election has in store for the future of your country, of your society, of anything? What do you think it holds in store? By the way, I'm joined here today by Pat
Aye.
and Jason.
Hey, everything's good.
And I'm Scott. All right, let's
The,
get this
the
started.
lonely Canadian.
Yeah, I'm up here in Canada, but I got my Captain America shirt on, so I'm ready to go.
I'm down
So
here in
great.
Texas.
Is
Well,
it a red part of Texas or a blue part of Texas?
The county I live in is between two major cities, which are blue, but the county I am in is it went predominantly red with this last election.
Okay.
yeah, it's pretty much red up here as well. So I guess what the election meant for us in the aftermath is it's probably the same thing as with all other had throughout our country's history, and that is just theater. It's all but nothing but theater for us. And of
Hmm.
course we have this idea of, which team is the better one, and we just throw out insult other saying that our policies are better than theirs. But what's missing is how can we how can we as Americans or just as individuals in general, no matter what part of the world you're from, is how can we make change possible and make it based on our principles and values, even if it's not what we hope it would be. um, we still have to live our life to the fullest. And sometimes we often think about the outcome rather than our actions, because we always think about, okay, how are we going to get an A in this class, instead of just studying the material, like what's important to us, like what's going to not similar to what's going to be on the test, but just knowing what the material is about before we take the test. Um, we're just so caught up in just trying to be number one rather than just looking at what we want to serve people. What might work for us might work for all of uh, all of our citizens, really.
So what do you have to say, Jason?
Well, for me, this past election was kind of a reaffirmation to myself that we should be putting our best foot forward, trying to lead a life right now that's like in line with our idea of a best future self. And in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, I never really liked the guy, and I'm genuinely interested in talking to the two of you, seeing what kind of comments we generate, because we don't really talk politics too often, and I don't know necessarily what where you guys stand, but I've always been in the camp that I didn't like the guy because I thought he didn't demonstrate good, wholesome values, things that you would look up to and say, yeah, I want to maybe be like that guy. Kind of always came across in like a negative light in my eyes. So I always had a hard time getting
My
behind
problem
him.
my problem with that statement is I don't really know if that's the desired role of, the commander in chief per se. I don't know if I want a leader to be all, touchy feely and lovey dovey and, trying to
Well, no, I
just
don't mean necessarily lovey dovey, but the the things we hear about him, that he lies so pervasively, it would seem, if you could believe it.
hey, show me a
That
politician who doesn't.
Good point.
that's true. They can all get into the weeds, but to me, that's what the election meant. Like where we're going, hopefully, is somewhere that's not more lovey-dovey, but somewhere that can give people ideals to look up to. Whereas with the current president, he's still president. I never felt that from him.
Hmm.
Yeah, and to go off on that, as much as we really like to be able to support our leader, whoever that might be, Trump or Biden, we also have to remember that we have to take care of ourselves, because sometimes the policies that they enact, whether they pass or not, is always going to have repercussions. And sometimes they will not work out the way we want them to. So we always have to just rely on ourselves to get through the next day the best we can. And you heard the other politicians that tried to either block or pass many of our recent policies, like, getting another stimulus check, or
Medicare for
getting
all or something.
Medicaid for all, or ban critical race theory, which, you could take it at that. But again, like both parties just bashing each other's heads against each other and not thinking about, okay, well, how can we possibly adapt into something more sane, something that's not very, I guess, word that broad out there, because many of our politicians are passionate at times, but how can we remain grounded in reality and give that kind of sense to the rest of the country?
No, that makes sense to me. Like this whole last 4 years has felt insane, exact opposite of what you were saying we should be going towards. It's just felt like a circus where the ringleader, if you will, has been like throwing fire on things. Those are my thoughts. What do you think, Scott?
I don't know. The whole American political system is kind of like literally foreign to me, so like I don't really see any other options other than, Trump or not Trump. Not even Trump or Biden. Like it felt like that entire election was between, keeping Trump or getting rid of Trump, take him or leave him kind of thing. And the only way to get rid of him was to vote for Biden, which is something that, like, just as a principle, I could never vote like that as a Canadian, because we have a kind of a two-party system. We have the Liberals and the Conservatives, but we also have the New Democratic Party, we have the Green Party, we have the People's Party of Canada, we have the Libertarian Party of Canada. So, and there's always like an independent running in your area that you can vote for most of the time. So my voting strategy has always been to vote for something and never just against the status quo. I feel like whenever you say like, oh, well, we need to pick between the lesser of two evils, you end up abandoning all of your political values in the process and saying, well, all those issues that I actually care about, I'm going to have to put on the back burner because I don't like our current leader. So, any thoughts
and we
about
were
that?
kind of talking about that in the Discord chat during the election night, where I was pretty much on the ground of the opposite and saying, I'm going to vote against Trump. And I think it's because, like, in your parliament, you guys have multiple parties representative of the people, where in our House of Representatives and Senate, we primarily have just the Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's why we see that same reflection with the presidential race. There's always a third party going to get on the ballot and run, but they've never really had a chance.
Yeah, and it used to be like a pretty similar opinion, but like, every once in a while the NDPs will get a seat in like British Columbia or something where they're mostly liberals, And like every once in a while, the Greens will sneak in and steal a little spot, something like that. But it is the same kind of thing up here where it's primarily conservative or liberal. And the only, like, there is a lot of projection of that in the media where it's like if you vote for, not one of the two parties, you're kind of throwing your vote away. And it was a big deal when the People's Party came up in the last election that they're all like, oh, you're going to split all of the right-wing votes and all of this and all of that, where the two parties, when you really look at them, they're both like conservative parties. Like the two guys that were running for the leadership of the conservative parties both ended up leading their own party, but the one that came in afterwards didn't get a single seat just because they couldn't be trusted to, maintain an actual adversary for the Liberal Party if everyone was going to vote for the PPC instead of the Conservatives. So it's like that fear definitely exists up here too.
And I get what you are saying about like not casting your vote just to spite another person, your opponent. However, in this particular race, I think a lot of people were doing that to signal that we didn't want this president to have another term. As the last 25 years or so of presidents, they've all been two-term presidents. And so when you re-elect a president, you're kind of saying, all right, we agree with the path that we're going down, or we agree with you as on a personal level. I never felt that either way with Donald Trump. But maybe that's a better strategy for when you're in an election of like a midterm every 2 years, or the election where the president's not going to win no matter what because he can't run again. So you have essentially all new candidates.
Right.
And I also liked what Pat was saying about how ideals are very high right now. I mean, I think people are like, oh yeah, we're going to get all this money and things are going to be rosy and like it's the rainbow after the storm or something. But I think it's going to be a lot of hard work. It's not just going to like, I mean, we have things really good right now, minus the pandemic is kind of out of control and there's a lot of people out of work, but I personally have things pretty good. So I'm not too like hanging on to, the ropes of, is this going to change my life in the near term? In the far term, I hear some of the student loan forgiveness things that the president-elect has talked about, like that would benefit me for sure.
How about you, Pat?
Well, again, I'm always focusing on just the idea of maintaining your life and your professionalism, no matter who is president. And yes, I have looked at the policies that Biden and Trump advocated for, especially during the debates. And that kind of led me to just thinking, okay, this is all, as much as this is all fun and everything like that, it's just going to boil down to the same kind of rhetoric that we've been dealing with for the past few decades. It's all just all show and everything. And I have criticized both of them. I've criticized both Trump and Biden on their policies.
Wonder if... Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I was going to say, just for the sake of being sane enough, I think it's best for all of us right now to actually just focus on ourselves and not let any opportunities waste away. Like, we have this podcast. We're trying to make it grow. I like to make this podcast grow. I like to see all of you grow. I like to see Scott. I like to see you continue to draw and publish comic books. I want to see Will being able to carry out his coaching business. I know you two are Canadians, of course, but just in general, it's just whatever happens in a country. I like to have people succeed in what they enjoy doing.
Yeah, well, that's another thing too. Like the whole American election is something that Canadians do take really seriously because I don't know, like I've noticed some kind of like a pendulum effect where in the States, when they go liberal, we get a conservative. When we get a conservative, you guys go liberal kind of thing. Like, so now that you've elected a Democrat, we might get a conservative in our next election. So, you know, I've voiced my disapproval of Justin Trudeau in the past. So he's kind of soured my taste of the left in this whole identity politics business. So I don't know how I'm going to vote. I need to look more into the candidate of Erin O'Toole, but you know, like talking about politics for Canadians, there's a lot of things I'd have to explain because our right wing and your right wing are definitely two different kinds of birds.
Yeah, definitely.
What is the right from a Canadian perspective look like, like compared to American?
I think the biggest thing would be is like our Conservative Party has pretty much given up on the whole abortion argument. Like we're pretty much like their opinion on it is like this country has already had this conversation where we're pro-choice. Like we're just gonna let it be. So like that makes it easier for someone who is a little bit more liberal minded or a little bit more moderate or centrist to go, you know what, the conservatives aren't as crazy as they have been in the past with all of their religious fundamentalism and any of this stuff. Like there's like it's leftovers from the past too, where you know all the Protestants would vote liberal, all the Catholics would vote conservative, and then the big secularization wave came through the country, and you know all of Quebec used to be like entirely Catholic. Now they're entirely secular. So like things change, things evolve, gets weirder and weirder as time goes on.
And you guys have like cannabis legalized throughout the whole country, right?
Yeah, every province has like different caveats to that, but yeah, it's generally decriminalized and fully legal. But like if you grow too many plants, they'll say, "Hey, don't do that."
Don't do that. I mean, when I think of Canada, I typically think of more liberal, left-leaning, but
oh yeah, for sure. Even our right wing is closer to the left, for sure.
I was wondering, Pat, like for somebody who maybe doesn't know anything about Biden's negative sides, like, do you have any more information, like what I should look into that I haven't have maybe missed? I've looked at like a lot of his policies and like what I saw, but I've heard from various people like, well, there's these, he's got some bad aspects too, but I never really looked into them too.
Well, and I'm not an expert in this. Okay, I'm just some dude on the internet with you guys. So I'm just someone who's just a writer and a reader of everything. But based on what I've read and listened from others on both sides, some of the policies that I would probably look into are probably his policies on taxes, because during both of the debates, Mike Pence kept mentioning Biden wants to raise your taxes, even though Biden and his team have denied it many times. The website that mentions it has never changed.
I heard him once in an interview say, "I'm gonna get rid of those pesky Trump tax cuts." I'm like, "What? You're gonna cut the tax cuts, so you're gonna raise taxes?" Okay. That's a weird thing to
Yeah.
shout in an interview. But I've also
The-
heard
I
him say that he's got the biggest, voter fraud organization to date. So
As another thing is just regulating guns too. But that has to go. But there are some states that don't want to get rid of certain guns specifically, like assault weapons and everything like that. That has to go through the legislators, and there are some states that don't want to. They don't want to do that. They say, "No, Biden, this is our state. We're not going to do that." So that's another thing to look into, and also the idea of doing trade deals with other countries too, like China. So
yeah, Trump
The-
kind of
the-
cut off the whole dairy cartel from up here in Canada.
Really?
Yeah,
I
they're
didn't know that.
they're kind of gangsters though, so I really don't have an opinion. I'm lactose intolerant anyway. I can't eat dairy.
The one thing that I see like divide most people, or that I should say, people are very opinionated on like the Second Amendment rights and like gun rights in America. And if you start telling a person who is like on the red team or the GOP gang, you can't have these guns, they get pissed off immediately. And then on the opposite spectrum, the one thing I've seen that kind of unites most people, and I could be wrong about this if you guys have other experience, but cannabis, like regardless of political affiliation, people seem to mostly favor cannabis unless they're like highly religious or in some kind of anti-cannabis cult.
The really Puritan crowd, they have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Do you guys think that they're going to change the cannabis laws here in the country in the next 4 years?
I was honestly surprised that Trump didn't do it. I think he would have got a lot of support. Like, how many states have already legalized it?
There's something like half the country, I think, or
Washington, Oregon, California, Utah, Colorado. I don't know what other states have legalized it.
So quite a few then, eh?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like 15 years ago, I never thought that would even be a possibility.
So how does that even work when it's federally illegal but legal in the state?
It creates a lot of problems for the companies, basically. The federal government has just decided to overlook the fact. It's pretty much like a reverse of the Confederate times, where you had slaves that wanted states, and the federal government was like, you can't have states. In this case, the federal government's like, you can't have cannabis, and the states are like, we want cannabis. And so they just, as a policy, they haven't really enforced it in those states that have decided to legalize it, because they've given the authority to the states, the so-called state rights.
Okay. So that sounds like something Trump would do rather than just sweeping federal, make it legal. Like he...
Okay. So you're thinking he would have just kept the state right argument, instead of like imposing a federal change.
It kind of makes sense in a way. Just like, I don't know, if it was me, I would be like fighting for the rights. Like, it's a plant, it should be legal.
But I think if he had legalized it, he could have easily won the election in Nevada, probably a couple of the states that he lost.
Yeah, I don't think he would have lost any supporters either. Like, really think about it. Think about like the guys wearing the MAGA hats. If you tell them that Trump just legalized weed, are they gonna be like, "Oh, I'm gotta vote for Biden now"? This horrible person.
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Like the way I've always seen it, for the past 4 years is Trump derangement syndrome exists on both sides. Like there's the worshippers of the guy, and there's the ones that are completely allergic to everything orange. So
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome on both sides. I like it.
And I mentioned this right before we recorded. I was listening to Robert Greene again.
Right.
And by the way, we should definitely get into his books real soon. That'll be very interesting to go over.
Yeah. Right
But he
after
mentioned,
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
yeah, stay tuned for that. He mentions the idea of irrationality, especially during the pandemic, and he mentions rage as like a virus, similar to the coronavirus, where it just happens out of nowhere. People can easily get infected by it, and it could spread. And we can see that on social media, like on Twitter and everything, where people are just spending hours and hours a day tweeting nonstop about how they hate President Trump or President-elect Biden, or how they hate this certain comic book character or everything like that. And it's all going back to emotion mostly. And we have no idea of how to control that too.
I really like that comparison because, as a fan of comics, the whole community is always complaining about the latest writer doing Batman, Tom King, he's either doing a terrible job or he's the greatest thing ever to happen.
Right?
Yeah, I think in the last 4 years, people have been complaining a lot more. Probably even more on the left side, complaints coming from that side. And I would say internet addiction maybe even have been up during these last 4 years because people are like
Yeah.
glued to their phones or devices wanting to see the next, scandal or whatever it
The
is.
last tweet from Trump.
The last tweet, yeah, like so hopefully in the next 4 years people will be able to kind of tune in and turn on and not really be stuck to their phones so much. I'm hoping that for myself. I'm going to definitely like as a vision of my future self, I'm not like stuck on my phone reading. I'm reading nonsensical stuff or stuff that is just filling my time and not important. I'm gonna like crack open a book and I might read some things from my phone, but I'll try to be doing less of the whole Reddit and Trump's Twitter pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and worst of all, social media can shape a narrative, not just by what people choose to cover, but what they refuse to cover.
Yeah. What do you think about the whole fake news narrative? And while we're at it, what do you think about the whole voter fraud narrative? Do you think there's anything to either one?
I'll tackle the fake news one. So I think this is a really novel term that kind of popped up, and essentially they're trying to say that, from my perspective, that news that doesn't fit the narrative that they want is going to be considered fake. And then at the same time, actual fake news has been generated that's highly biased. I guess these would be like op-eds and things like that, but they're written as actual news. And then you get articles that are just metaphorically fake news, and they don't actually say anything of substance. So I see it as three different types of fake news.
Yeah, and sometimes the idea of fake news just, again, it spins and misleads to a point that justifies calling it a lie. Once the tricks are out, you can't unsee them. They're all going to be locked into your consciousness, and you're going to be talking about it nonstop with other people who may not know that it's all a bunch of lies and everything.
Yeah,
Um,
for me, it's hard to actually peg down if they're lying with like malicious intent or if they genuinely believe the things they're saying. Like with the whole, just a quick example, you might remember the whole Covington kid scandal. I don't watch a lot of American news, so this is my frame of reference.
All right, all right.
But like when the media first picked it up and they saw nothing but, a kid smirking at this Native American pounding his drum, they do you think they were making it look like the kid was the bad guy, or do you think they genuinely believe the kid was the bad guy because they have such an image of a demon in their head of anything that wears a MAGA hat has to be evil, even though when we figure it out afterwards that these people came in and just invaded this group of kids waiting for their bus and started pounding their drums with other people off to the side screaming a bunch of you know religious rhetoric, stuff like that. And I don't know, it
I
gets pretty
think
dicey.
I think they know what their readers want to think. They already know what the conclusions of the readers are going to be, so they try to frame the picture in that particular way. I mean, it's biased journalism, is how
Yeah.
I see it.
I'm always reminded of the allegory of the cave whenever something like this comes up. We are used to seeing shadows on the wall, but we never look behind the rock wall. And then once we do, and then we eventually find our way out of the cave and realize, okay, this is what reality truly is. We want to go back in and get our other friends and say, hey, did you notice that there's a way out of this cave? Come on, follow me. I know the way and everything. And they'll just like, wait, what are you talking about?
So
That
just
doesn't really
just
fit
the
and everything.
idea, the idea that all of this MAGA crowd is, pure evil. That's a shadow on the wall. You have to
Mm-hmm.
you have to figure out, you have to climb out of the cave and come back down to figure out, what is it about these MAGA kids that I really don't like? Try to find some common ground.
And also, they can cut and edit everything in order to
Yeah.
deceive people, even cut someone off and bury the rest of the statement. Like just recently, when live on, I think it was on CNBC, where Trump was giving a statement about how he and his legal team are going to look into the voter frauding in certain states and that they were going to take it to the Supreme Court. And then immediately after the first few seconds, Shepard Smith, one of the news anchors, decided to cut it off and say, "Okay, we're not gonna air this. We're not gonna let him finish because we know that this is a complete lie. We're not gonna go through it." That literally happened recently.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's just this idea of it's completely maddening to see how one side wants to show something but cover up the rest and even go as far as to blame the other team. Uh, and so, and even our side is doing it. Like we do that all the time too. We can nod our head and admit that part, but again, we always use our emotions to ignore what's really going on at face value. And it's always best to just catch ourselves. And Robert Greene, again, I keep mentioning him, but he mentions that when something like this happens, you want to catch yourself and ask, okay, is this really is this really part of who I am? Is there something else involved? And is it an ego thing? And that's what causes a false sense of reality.
Hmm.
This Robert Greene, is he like a historical commentator, nonfiction writer?
He's a nonfiction writer. He studied um, he studied classic studies. Like he learned about the Greeks and ancient Rome and various figures of power like Napoleon and Seneca, Aristotle, and he even learned about the Battle of Sparta and many of these other historical motives. And he not only studied them as historical figures, but he learned how they were thinking at the time, how they used their strategies to win wars, win arguments, to seduce certain people, but also provide a positive light on them. Like, sure, some of these people, like Napoleon, were no doubt horrendous people who were power hungry, but some of their methods, when put into practice, can provide a positive light sometimes if you use them responsibly. So that's what he studies. He studies a lot of history. He studies a lot of strategy. And yeah.
Well, I'm just reminded of the idea that people are not necessarily just their ideas. Like Scott, you were saying how not every person that wears a MAGA hat is an evil person by default. And I completely agree with that 100%. There are possibly some that maybe are really bad, but that's not the majority of them at all. And the same thing on the other side. But to address the other question you had, the voter fraud one, what is it that you had heard? So we're talking about the same thing.
Well, I've heard plenty of conflicting stories, but like the the biggest thing was like I heard a bunch of like from leftist outlets saying, "Oh, Trump's not going to leave office if he loses the election." I'm just like, that'll never
Yeah.
happen. And then I'm like, "Oh, he's suing for voter fraud? How many states? There must be something going on." And I looked at it and like there's like all of these instances of little ticks going up. I'm like, I don't know if that means anything. They could have just like had a glitch on the website. You think a little spike in blue votes is gonna mean anything to me? Like we've already gone through the whole mail-in ballots are predominantly Democrat and the in-person ballots are predominantly Republican. So you know you're going to be counting Democrat ballots at different times as the Republican ballots. So why wouldn't it spike up like that? But I don't know. At the same time, it's like all I'm hearing from right-wing side is there's fraud, there's this battle isn't over yet, and my instinct is to be like, come on. I wouldn't have voted for Biden, but take the loss, guys.
Yeah, I think he has not conceded yet, and the way the media is framing it is that he won't leave office, he won't concede for whatever reason. But the voter fraud thing that I had heard about was that the way the president had framed it in everybody's mind, that mail-in ballots were somehow not legal, and so I think there's a lot of people that are in that camp and just assuming that we should have only counted the ballots that were cast like by midnight on election day.
It's very weird. It's very weird down here, Scott.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully understand the situation, but yeah, weird.
I don't blame you. I mean, there's some things about this election that I don't understand. I mean, there's still a lot to uncover and everything. And plus, we got until 2 months until Biden is elected on January 20th. So there's still going to be a lot to cover. And we've had past presidents who refused to concede, like Al Gore for George W.
Right,
And
that one took like 40 days or something like that, right? I think I
yeah,
heard like that on JRE.
yeah, that he finally conceded in December or something like that.
Huh.
But yeah, it's getting weird and even exhausting too.
Yeah, another thing that made me think about it is just a meme that I saw that said, You know, the people that for 4 years have been shouting about how Trump stole the election are now convinced that no voter fraud existed in this election.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
It's like I kind of think of it like a baseball game, you know, like if the umpire calls a ball when it was really a strike, yelling at the umpire is going to do absolutely nothing. It's, you know, it got called. It's it's done. It's over with. You have to deal with that. Same way with like a goal in hockey. If you play a minute after the goal is scored, like after pausing, then, you know, they're not going to go back and change the point the next day when they look at all the camera angles and say, well, we've actually proven that he actually won 4-2. But, you know, like, you have to just call it at some point. So I feel like Trump kind of has that mentality, but at the same time, if there's still ballots there to be counted, then how could you say, you know, stop counting the ballots? Like, he made it sound like people were still showing up past the deadline to, like, continue casting ballots. And, like, there's no way that's happening. Who's lying to me right now? Who is it that's lying to me? Turns out both, probably.
Definitely.
Well, I know at the beginning of this year, I was in the spirits of this is going to be a very hopeful year. And then this pandemic kind of happened, and I was like,
Mm.
well, I guess I was wrong. But then I guess I'll just say my guy, the team I'm on, even though I don't like saying that, wins the election. So now I'm feeling a little more hopeful. But I'm sure half the country, the other half of people that voted for the red candidate, probably are not feeling that same.
No, like that's the major thing that I've observed is it's either yes, finally Trump is gone or no, we're going to continue fighting for Trump's rights, election fraud, this and that. So, you
We
know,
still have a long way to come, a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it feels honestly like a sporting event the way people are like talking about it. I wish people were more political, but like we could go back to our conversation about King Saul in First Samuel, how, you know, it might not be Trump or Biden that become the King Saul, but hopefully they have the same effect that King Saul had, where we realize, you know, here's how we start being political the right way, not just red versus blue.
Yeah, definitely.
So, do we have anything else to add?
Well, for those who are um, still kind of unsure of how to go about their lives after this whole thing, just remember you have a story to tell. Your story has to go on, just like everybody else's. And like Matthew McConaughey says, you have to get constructive, but also remember your principles and values. You still have to live up to them. You still have to provide them with everything you have to offer to the world. Even if things are not going the way you want them to, you still have a duty to give yourself out to the rest of the society.
Yeah, and whether or not your team won or lost this election, this little game, just remember there's going to be another one in about 4 years, so you can keep playing, you know, get better at the game in the next 4 years, practice a little bit.
And I like to just add by saying I think it's all an illusion anyway, so don't get too trapped.
Everything is Maya. And
Yep.
yeah,
Everything is good.
check us out at our website at www.bookwave.club. Like, comment, subscribe, share us around. You know, tell your best friend about the book club. Tell your best friends about Meaning Wave, because Meaning Wave exists. And may the force be with you.
Or as Will would say, equal to mass times acceleration.
Peace out.
One love.